Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Hotline Miami for PC, Mac, Linux, PlayStation 3, and PS Vita. This is a top-down action game by Dennaton Games and published by Devolver Digital in October of last year for PC. And then it was released in the Humble Bundle this March, which meant a Mac and Linux release. And then finally it got released on PS3 and Vita in June of this year. And it's a pretty interesting game because it's a very unique style going on, and I can't really think of any other games to compare it to, really. Because I can't think of anything off the top of my head that really does what Hotline Miami does, so it's certainly unique. But the question is, does that uniqueness translate into a good game or not? Well, let's start with a rather unique presentation, where there are two things I have to get out of the way really quickly. The first one being, if you get motion sick really easily, don't play this game. Because it has this effect where the screen tilts back and forth. In fact, pretty much everything tilts back and forth. And so you've got that combined with a bunch of psychedelic colors. It'll probably make you nauseous if you get motion sick really easily, of course. So that's a problem. But at the same time, it creates a pretty interesting effect that I'll get to in a moment. The second thing is, if you're squeamish, don't play this game because it's extremely gory. And you may think, well, it's pixel art, but then you play the game, you're like, oh, man. I mean, it's absolutely brutal. And I think they can kind of get away with it because it's pixel art. And so it's obviously very cartoonish and it's very stylized. And combine that with the fact that the pixel art itself, while for the environments it's actually really nice, but for the characters it doesn't look very good. It's kind of an interesting effect. Because the characters in themselves are rather ugly, actually. And so when you're playing through this game, you've got this really odd combination where the environments are pretty lavishly detailed. There's a lot of stuff in them, and the pixel art for that stuff is actually really well done. And then you get to the characters who just look really odd in a lot of ways. And you have this weird, trippy screen tilting effect with all the psychedelic colors and everything. It's a very unique art style, and it actually fits the game really, really well. But at the same time, it can get kind of annoying, and if you have problems with, again, motion sickness, or if you get eye strain a lot, then you'll probably run into problems with this game. I did notice after a while I would get headaches from it, but it was usually when I would just play it for quite a while. So if you're just going in for like a level or two at a time, then you'll probably be fine. But if you're trying to go in there and just do a completionist run in one go, you're probably going to run into problems with that art style. Anyway, what about the sound design? Well, the sound design is composed of two aspects because they don't have any voice acting at all in this game. Those two aspects are the music and the sound. The sound fits the game really well. You have gun sounds that sound particularly beefy, and in fact the shotguns sound really powerful, and considering that everything in this game kills you in one hit, that's a pretty nice feature. But the music is what steals the show here. The music in this game is absolutely fantastic, and it fits it perfectly. And when you're going through these levels, you'll be finding all these tunes that go along with the levels, and you're like, wow, I really like this one. Then you go to the next level, wow, this one's great too, and you just keep doing that throughout the entire game. And I'm sure that you'll find one that's your favorite. Like, my particular favorite song from this game is the one that it plays when you go into the disco. And so you'll find something to like about the soundtrack, particularly if you like electronic music. So it fits the game perfectly, and it's a great soundtrack, so that's a good thing. But what about the gameplay and the story? Because all this unique presentation and that fantastic soundtrack, it wouldn't mean anything if the gameplay and the story weren't good. Well, the story's set in 1980s Miami, and you play as a guy who's never referred to by his actual name. He's actually never referred to by any name. People just taken to calling him Jacket because he wears a Letterman jacket. But basically he gets these calls on his answering machine, and they say, hey, your cake order is ready, or whatever, and give him a location to go pick it up, or whatever. The instructions vary throughout the game. But when he gets there, he puts on an animal mask of some description, starting with a rooster mask, and then goes in and slaughters every single Russian gangster that's there. That's pretty much all that you can make out of the storyline, actually, because The rest of it is really hard to follow. Things don't necessarily take place in order, they're all over the place, there's a lot of things, and it's like, hey, is this really happening? No, it's not. And so you'll see all these weird hallucinations. It's bizarre. And the story branches off eventually, and you're just kind of like, wait, what? What's going on? I'm confused. And that's what I felt like throughout the entirety of the game with the storyline. I was just like, what the hell is this? Now, I've put up with some weird storylines before in various things. Like, I liked Memento, actually. And that didn't necessarily take place in order and everything, but this one's wildly different, and it's... Some people are going to like it, others not. I find the story itself is unnecessarily confusing. It's like they could have explained things a bit better. When you actually get through the entirety of the game, including epilogues and stuff like that, you're still left pretty much clueless. So, it's a very confusing game as far as the story goes, and while some people will like that, people like me won't. But what about the gameplay? Now, the gameplay is actually pretty much the most interesting part of this game, because when you go into these levels, you started off with a mask selection. And you start off with the Rooster mask, which doesn't give you any bonuses or detriments or anything like that. And then, as you play the game, you'll unlock other masks. Like, say, the Tiger mask that gives you Fists of Fury, and when you wear that mask, you actually run in and you can punch people and they'll just instantly die. It's magic. Or the Horse mask that lets you knock down people with doors, only instead of just knocking them down like you do normally, it will just instantly kill them. Stuff like that. And the other masks give you other abilities, like some will make you move faster, some will make you start off with a knife as opposed to just nothing, all sorts of different things. But the basic objective for each level is just to go through and wipe out every single enemy in the level. Now, there are some that give you other objectives as well, like pick up this item and then bring it back, or something like that. But, for the most part, it's a pretty simple game. You basically only have 3 controls, and those are movement, the attack button, and the pick-up/throw button. If you don't have anything in your hands at a given moment, you'll pick up whatever the item is, and if you have an item, you'll throw that item. Pretty straightforward controls, actually. It takes some getting used to, but once you get used to it, it actually flows pretty well. And then you have this rest of this game where your basic objective, again, is to slaughter every single gangster in the entire level, and you do this by finding a weapon in the game somewhere. You might find a melee weapon, or a gun, or a throwable of some description, and then you have to take out as many enemies as you can, and obviously you'll get downed quite often, because not only do the enemies die in one hit, but so do you. So you're extremely vulnerable here, and you have to be very careful with how you actually play this game, which creates a very unique experience. On the one hand, when you manage to get through a level on the first try, particularly later on in the game where things get a lot harder, it's immensely satisfying. And particularly if you can do it really quickly and get a ton of bonus points and everything, because every time you complete a level, you'll get a summary of your score, and you'll get ranked based on what your points were, and you'll get unlocks from that. Like, it'll unlock weapons, it'll also unlock the masks that way. But when you get those higher ranks, it's just immensely satisfying, because this game is not easy. It's really difficult, particularly later on in the game. And so that part of the game is immensely satisfying. But getting to that point where you're able to do that can be immensely frustrating at the same time. So it's this very odd situation where the game is both immensely satisfying and immensely frustrating. And when you combine that together, it actually works out pretty well in the game's favor. You don't really have all that many things that you need to pay attention to. Most of the game is pretty simplistic. You have your basic gangsters who go down in one hit, and they'll carry a variety of weapons. They might have baseball bats, or golf clubs, or pipes, or they might have guns, any number of things. You have your upper tier enemies where they're just a bit tougher. Like, there's a bunch of big guys that run around. They'll take multiple shots to bring down, but they're not that big of a deal, particularly if you have a gun. Then you have your boss characters. There are boss fights in this game, and they're pretty difficult, actually. Again, because you go down in one hit, and they don't. So you basically have to find out what strategy works throughout each level. And it pretty much seems tailor-made for speedrunning, because, again, you're timed, and you get all these bonus points and everything for all sorts of the different ways you can take out your enemies and all that sort of thing. So, it's a pretty unique game. Now, it is a really short game. I beat the whole thing in about 2.5 to 3 hours. Yeah, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Short game. But it's also not a very expensive game. I believe it's $10 on Steam. And so, it's this kind of weird experience. And it's extremely visceral. It's extremely gory. It's psychedelic. It's trippy. Mostly, though, it's just a really interesting game. Is it a really good game? I don't necessarily know that. And that's kind of the weird part of this thing. Because part of me wants to say, hey, it's actually a really good game. But the other part's like, hey, while you do find some of these things immensely satisfying, remember, it's immensely frustrating too. So, it's a kind of a mixed bag. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. But people who are into action games, particularly difficult action games, you'll probably get something out of this. Ultimately, I give it a 3.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.